Denmark is set to become the very first European country to give its citizens copyright over their face, body, and voice. It's all to combat AI-generated deepfakes. Under this draft law, anyone featured in a deepfake can demand it be taken off online platforms and claim compensation. But will this be enough to safeguard individuals' rights online? And will other European countries bring in the same laws? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, AI-generated deepfakes can mimic the likeness of a person. Everyone from celebrities and politicians to everyday people have been imitated by this technology, often without their permission. Denmark wants to change this with a law that gives people copyright to their own features. Is this the start of greater digital identity rights in Europe? And how would this impact legislation in the AI industry?
AI can clone my face, my voice, even my expressions. That means a version of me could be out there saying anything without me ever opening my mouth.
The government wants to give every citizen full copyright over their face, body, and voice. And if the bill passes, Denmark will become the first country in Europe to do it. Under the law, anyone targeted by a deepfake could demand its removal from online platforms and claim compensation.
What we think about truth and knowledge is completely changing because the technology is just fooling our eyes, our ears, and that's the thing we trust. Like most is how we experience the world, and those are the things that are completely fooled at the moment.
And it's not only famous people who are at risk. Deepfakes started as internet novelties, putting movie stars like Leonardo DiCaprio into scenes he never acted in, or creating speeches from politicians that never happened. But it's not just entertainment. In France, scammers pose as Brad Pitt using AI-generated media, tricking a woman out of more than 800,000 euro. The EU already requires labeling of AI-generated content, but Denmark's plan goes further, treating likeness as personal property. Satire will remain legal, but deception won't. Denmark hopes its law will inspire similar protections across Europe to help draw the line between truth and fabrication.
Here's a version of me created entirely by AI. It didn't take long, less than an hour to generate, and it can say anything I never said, make expressions I never made, and even make you believe it's real. This is exactly why Denmark's proposed law matters, because next time, it could be your face telling a lie.
Well, let's meet our guests here with me in the studio. I'm delighted to say we have Jayne Mather. Jayne is author of Humans and AI, The Future of Work, and she's also a technology adoption consultant. Julia Hornle is Professor of Internet Law. That's at Queen Mary University of London. And in Virginia, in the United States, we have Adam Firestone. Adam works in cryptography, and he is also a cybersecurity expert. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Come to you first, Jayne. Talk to me about the damage deepfakes can do to a person.
Well, there's some legitimate use cases for it, satire, humour, education, but there's also some very nefarious uses as well. So, in effect, when this goes out tomorrow, people can take my image, my voice, my mannerisms, and they can make me do or say anything, which, it could be explicit content, it could be political content, it could be reputational damage to me. So it's quite scary, and there's not a lot you can do to prevent people from doing that to you. What we're hopefully going to talk about today is how Denmark are leading the way and giving us recourse, so I can say, actually, my image, my likeness is mine. It belongs to me as part of my human right, and I get to say what happens to my image.
Julia, give me your thoughts on how damaging deepfakes are for someone.
I think there are various types of damage. So example, think about fraud. People impersonating a politician recommending some sort of cyber investment, which is a fraud. Romance scams, where trust is being built through AI fake identities. And then political misinformation. A politician looks like he's saying something which he never said. So I think those are the dangers. But the problem is magnified because in the past, you needed to be an expert to produce deepfakes. Now, almost everyone can just get an app, use generative AI, and produce these deepfakes. So it's very, very easy. And that's the trouble, I think.
And they just need, what, one picture of the person?
The picture or the voice. So there are obviously deepfakes which imitate a voice, which is very concerning for banking security as well.
Wow. Adam, give me your thoughts on the damage being done by deepfakes to people.
I'm the CEO of a company called Sixero, and we're about solving problems. And in the context of deepfakes, sure, it's a problem, but I think we can solve that problem. And I think there are technical and regulatory things we can do. I just don't necessarily think that the way the Danes have gone about it is going to deplete the ends they reached.
So what do you think they should be doing then?
So let's start with the idea that this is not new. We have seen deepfakes starting as far back as 100 years ago when images were altered during the Russian Revolution. We've seen sort of thing happen during the start of the Second World War when images of what were purported to be Polish soldiers were shown in across the border in Germany. So not a new problem. The problem, as was mentioned previously, is one of velocity. And so what can we do about this? We can influence behavior. If we're going to influence behavior, there's a carrot and stick approach that probably needs to be taken. The Danish law creates a cause of action. But the problem with that cause of action is the costs of prosecuting that cause of action are pushed onto the plaintiff or pushed onto the person who's been aggrieved by the fake. And if they're not financially in a position to go ahead and prosecute that action, we're not going to be able to get calls back when they want.
Jayne, just talk to me about what Denmark is doing. It's groundbreaking. Do you think it'll make any difference?
I hope so, and I hope to see other countries following suit. So what it means is that anyone then owns their copyright for their image. So it gives them recourse to get content taken down. It gives them recourse to claim compensation, and also that the platforms who are promoting the content can then be subjected to fines. So I think it's an absolute brilliant step forward, but there's more that needs to be done. I would like to be looking now at regulation against the platforms. Now, the platforms have traditionally said before deepfakes with any kind of content, we're not the creators, we're not the publishers, we just put the content out there. But if a deepfake video goes viral, then that's because their algorithms have prioritized it. So they should be held accountable just the same way that a newspaper editor would be held accountable for what goes on their front page.
Julia, just come in on what Denmark are doing then, your thoughts.
So Denmark, I think the approach is new in a sense that it specifically focuses on all sorts of deepfakes and all sorts of harm. So that is a real advantage, I think, to what we have. In most countries, we have sort of bits of legislation here which might apply and bits of law which apply here, but we don't have that sort of wholesale approach. So that's the advantage. But I think the problem is, as already has been pointed out, people will not go to court necessarily because they might not have the time, the means, or the wherewithal to go to court. So we need to have a two-pronged approach. One of that is the platforms, the social media platforms where this content appears, which is what Jayne was pointing out. They should have to proactively sort of find this content and either label it or take it down. But what hasn't mentioned yet is really the tech companies. And the question is whether the law should provide standards for them to label content, because it's very difficult to find the user who creates the deepfake. So it's the platforms and the tech providers who I think have to comply with proactive regulation and standards to deal with these issues.
And presumably these tech companies are making a lot of money off people clicking and watching these videos.
Absolutely, yeah. It's obviously driving a lot of, the content drives a lot of people to the platform, and they make money through advertising massively. Yes, absolutely.
Adam, to you, can you see your country, the United States, getting on board with some sort of legislation in the future to tackle deepfakes?
Well, I certainly believe that it will be spoken about. I don't think that there's a tradition in this country that will be kind or receptive to the idea of something that curtails freedom of speech over the internet. What I do think, the point was very well made about there's a financial incentive to create platforms and to create the mechanisms to be used on those platforms. And if we want to influence behavior, we influence it financially. Uh, I want to emphasize that penalties alone don't work. People will find a way around those penalties and they will tie up things for years and years and years in litigation. So instead of just litigation or instead of just a strict liability regime, you've got to marry that up with the idea of financial incentive. Saying to a startup or saying to an AI company, we will make it worth your while to ensure that you build in safeguards is a very powerful incentive and strikes at the root of the problem as opposed to being reactive.
Adam, it seems a bit of a Wild West situation at the moment. Is that a fair assessment that there's no regulation and people are just doing what they want with technology?
Right, but that's a standard operating procedure for technology, right? The technology comes out, it's deployed, people start to use it, and sometime after that, and there's always a lag. It doesn't matter what the technology is. We saw this with broadband. We saw this with the printing press. Uh, there is a realization that, oh, we need to create a mechanism so that fits in with civil society. And the question is, how do we make that the adoption of that mechanism attractive enough that it becomes pervasive? Because if it's again just a stick doesn't get you where you want to go.
Thanks, Adam. Jayne, to you, let's talk politics. How damaging can deepfakes be, do you think, for a politician who suddenly is pictured with one policy that they would never align themselves to, and that video goes viral?
Well, it's incredibly damaging because, again, to the naked eye, you just can't tell with this content. You can't tell what's real and what's not until we get tools that are going to label the content. So you can try and do damage control. You can try and say we didn't see it, we didn't say that. But often, once the content's out there, the damage is already done. People believe it. We've seen that a lot with misinformation on the internet anyway.
So, Julia, is there a risk to democracy from these deepfakes?
I think there definitely is. And that's the greater risk compared to the personal risk to the politicians who also have a reputational risk. But actually, democracy is at stake here. So if people vote in elections and referenda based on fake information, basically a politician saying something which they've never said, that's a much greater risk. So for us as voters, we don't know whether the information we see on social media, whether this is a deep fake, whether it is true, or whether it is just made up. So how do we distinguish between true and fake information? All the more important now that the younger generation, they don't read newspapers anymore. They don't watch necessarily broadcasting. They get most of their news from their social media feeds, and they don't know whether this is true or not.
Jayne, this is very worrying, isn't it? Absolutely brilliant point that young people are not consuming news in the way we would have done.
Yes, exactly. So there's content being piped down to them all the time, and it's short form content. So are they taking that time to critically analyze what's correct, what's true, and double check things, triple check things? Let me fact check this, because they're just scrolling. But it leads to a wider issue as well. I believe in AI. I believe in the benefits that we can get from it. But to get that widespread adoption, it starts with trusting the technology, trusting those who are building it, those who are regulating it. And then once we get that acceptance that we can trust it, that's when we can start to get benefits around the world to businesses, societies, and individuals. So people need to be able to trust what we see and be able to critically analyze what content that is being fed to them.
Adam, are we reaching a point where it's very difficult now to distinguish between AI and reality?
I don't think it's a new thing. If we think about how information, especially to an electorate, has been disseminated for the last 150 years, we have always seen in the West, I mean, in the UK and the US, a sets of information that were at odds with one another. Maybe some were true, maybe some were not. We got the phrase yellow journalism over 100 years ago. And so the question really becomes less of how are we going to control what's put out in the media and in the press, and how are we going to provide um, the incentive and the ability to critically and use a sieve, a filtering mechanism of fact to societies. And that comes down to how we think about and what we do about public education. We've sort of been abdicating that idea to the legislature, to the technical companies, to all sorts of other things, except where it really belongs, and that's in creating an educated and aware public. You know, if you think about the Douglas debates at the end of the 1850s, 30,000 people would show up to listen for 3 hours. Two men debate the issues of the day and make up their minds based on what they had been taught and what they had learned.
Just looking at politics in your country, the presidential election last year, do you think people believe these fakes when they see them?
I think people will believe what they want to believe. I think people will believe a fake if it's consistent with the worldview they brought to the fake, and people will not believe the truth if that truth is inconsistent with the worldview they brought to it.
Jayne,
Again, this is a critical thinking exercise.
thanks, Adam. Jayne, to you, that's a very good point, isn't it? People will believe what they, if they see something, if they don't like Donald Trump and they see him saying something outrageous, even if it's a deep fake, they're more inclined to believe it because
It is,
sits with their
it's
politics.
that cognitive bias, isn't it? And you seek out content that reinforces your own beliefs anyway. So absolutely, and it's the polarizing content that the platforms are promoting with their algorithms anyway. So the more this content carries on and more misinformation keeps on happening, the more polarized we'll be.
Julia, I noticed Denmark, this proposed legislation, they're making an exception for satire and parody. But the problem, as I see it with that, is that a lot of political content is humorous or is satire. How are they going to get around that if someone creates a deep fake of, say, their Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, saying something funny but equally outlandish and it goes viral? What will they do then?
It's very interesting, that question. We see that in EU legislation as well. So the DSA says that you have to mark fake content. The AI Act says you have to mark fake content or allow it to be recognized in the metadata, but it shouldn't defeat the effects of humor and parody. And of course, humor and parody only works if you don't immediately realize that this is a fake. So I think this conflict between what is actually illegitimate misinformation and what is fun and humor, that is not a clear black line which can be easily drawn. So even if the legislation kind of creates that carve out, I think it will still be legally difficult, or for the platforms, it will be difficult to make that distinction and correctly, sort it in the right box. So that is a legal problem, I think. But it's eventually, I think we will get guidelines and standards worked out.
It's subjective as well, isn't it? But I think it'll come down to proven intent. Is the intent to deceive, defame, to cause harm? And I think there needs to be some kind of legal test on that. But absolutely, there's still a lot of humorous content out there that I enjoy. So that should continue.
Thank you. Adam, what advice would you give someone watching who believes they are a victim of a deep fake? What rights does a citizen have right now?
Depends where they are, huh? So right now, I think you have the standard tort remedies, right? You can initiate a cause of action. And that's probably not going to get you anywhere because prosecuting the case in the United States is anywhere from $50 to $300, $400,000, and there's no guarantee on return. Even if you were to have that covered with a contingency fee, which I suspect most attorneys will not take at this point. I think the other part of it is you can complain to, or you can send out discussion points to your legislator, to law enforcement folks, and to maybe add a little bit of pressure and get that taken down. But right now, I think we are, as you said before, a little bit in the Wild West with respect to the technology, in that there really aren't any speed bumps or brakes. And we are not really incentivizing technology companies or platforms to not do things that we're talking about.
Thanks, Adam. Jayne, that's staggering, isn't it? You need $400,000 if you're going to take a case,
Oh,
and you're the victim.
absolutely. It's like what Julia referred to earlier. You need to have the money and the time and the energy to pursue the legal route. So I think it's important that we continue to have conversations like this. I would also love to see a bit more global consensus, global cooperation on regulation as well. So I think I said this last time I was on your show as well. There's lots of talk about what the technology is going to do. Everyone's building infrastructure. Countries are racing to be the most dominant, but nobody's coming together to decide what is the future, what is the vision for humanity, and what do we want that future to look like. So it's having conversations like this about actually as people, I want to own my likeness. I want to be able to trust what I see on the internet is really important, and hopefully will influence again those building it and those regulating it.
Julia, how long until the European Union as a whole then looks at this issue, because it is clearly an issue for a lot of people as victims, and they look at what Denmark have done and they've thought, you know what, we will have an EU-wide policy on this?
We already have in many ways. So we have what is called a Digital Services Act, which is a piece of the EU regulation. And it basically means that the platforms like social media platforms or search, they have to take down content. So if you notify them there's a deep fake and that constitutes defamation or is, against the criminal law for some other reason because it's fraud, then you can actually, and they will have to take it down. The problem is you take one piece of content down and another 5 reappear. So the more difficult question is to what extent this Digital Service Act, this new piece of legislation, forces the platforms to be proactive and actually use, for example, deepfake detection systems or label content as deepfakes. And I think that's where the European Commission as the regulator and also the national regulators will be working to produce codes of conduct, guidance, to these platforms to say you need to use this and this technology and in this way. This will not solve all the problems, but I think we have a framework in place, yes.
Jayne, is it tough enough what's there right now? Does it deter anyone?
It's a welcome step forward, and I'd like to see other countries following suit. But yeah, there's great things happening in lots of different places. Like I know China are looking at watermarking, conversations going on about the embedded metadata. The UK are trying to protect the content children see. The EU are taking that risk-based approach about what we shouldn't use it for. The US tend to be against regulation generally anyway. And again, it's about they just want to innovate, which is absolutely fine. But imagine if we all came together and agreed all this collectively, that'd be what I'd want to see.
Well, let's get the US perspective. Adam, are you against legislation per se?
Well, speaking for all 340 million Americans, no, okay. I think the American perspective tends to be a bit more libertarian. I mean, we tend to be a bit more free market. But I want to come back to what's been discussed and what's been bandied about a bit. There is a blueprint. There is a way to do this. We just haven't done it yet. You can create guidelines and regulations that say, here are the 3, 5, half dozen things, the speed bumps, the brakes that the technology has to have in place if you're going to combat deepfakes. Here is the liability if you don't have them. Here are the protections and the tax incentives if you do have them, and go. And leave that up to the individual organizations how they want to implement that. And that becomes a reflection of the relative each organization's risk appetite. At the end of the day, organizations are in the business of making money, and to do that, you have to decrease your risk. And if there is a national consensus, whether by regulation or by legislation that says, here are the rules of the road, they're going to abide by that. The problem is when the rules of the road become punitive as opposed to proactive, build it this way is one thing. Oh, you did something wrong, we're going to come after you is another. The latter tends to be rejected and avoided. The former tends to be seen as just the way the landscape is, and then it gets incorporated. So I'm going to go back and reiterate what I've been trying to say, which is you've got to set out a list of priorities and design paradigms that are expected much in the same way that the American automobile industry adopted a whole bunch of safety factors after the publication of Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, back in the 1960s. We have the technology, we have the ability, we have the engineering wherewithal to do this. We just haven't done it yet because the incentives haven't been placed in front of industry yet.
Thank you, Adam. Jane, final point. I guess we should applaud Denmark for being on the front foot here.
Yes, it's about being proactive with it, and rather than waiting for the EU laws to come in, they said, right, we're protecting our citizens. So yes, absolutely, and let's hope that conversations like this, the news coverage of it, influences the laws in other countries as well. And I should own my image and my digital assets. Absolutely shouldn't be controversial.
Julia, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? We're all individuals. You would not steal someone's fingerprints, but the technology is there now to steal their face, their voice, their bodies.
It should be a human right. And I think that was the approach which Denmark took, that it actually is a human right. We should own our own personality traits, which are now undermined by this technology. And it makes it unlawful so that platform regulation can say, you're providing illegal content, so take it down, prevent it from being uploaded. And so I think media literacy also has a role to play. But I think one of the problems is that most content is targeted. So what you and I see on our social media feeds will be very different. So it's targeted to what we believe and what we like.
Because of our algorithms?
Because of the algorithms. So we're more likely to believe different types of deepfakes. So it kind of manipulates it. And I think that's why media literacy, while it's important, it's more difficult.
Julia, thank you. Jane and Adam in the United States, fascinating. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.